What are you gonna do about all this land disappearing?
Oh, Lord. It's gonna be a big change.
In 50 years, home will be underwater. Yeah, all these coastal areas are gonna be flooded over. I've lived here my whole life. Over here in southeast Louisiana, we face many coastal problems because of the constantly eroding land. There's not gonna be land. We'll have levees, which are basically land masses that are formed in like a wall to keep high sea levels out. But some people still live outside the lock systems. They're starting to leave their land that they've been on for hundreds of years. Literally, it's ancient land. Whenever land goes, everything goes with it.
We turn now to the dangerous new storm threats across the south. Tornado watches
That human
in effect
activities
right now.
are responsible for climate.
Limited access to some water.
We'll see a lot more fires.
The era of global warming has ended. The era of global boiling has arrived.
The rate of temperature increase is without precedent. We're facing a future that we don't understand, we can't predict fully.
A lot of places are simply not going to be comfortable to live in. All human settlements have to face this problem. They grew up in a climate which is going to be much different from the climate we're going to get in the future. You can see the intense rainstorms. You can see the incredible heat waves where people are dying.
Large populations will have to move all over the world because of sea level rise. We're going to see more Category 4 and 5 hurricanes, or maybe even categories we've never experienced before.
We're about to get a brand new climate.
Climate change means that we have to live differently now, immediately, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. We're very late getting started.
Where are we gonna live?
You have to move somewhere else, a little bit higher elevation.
Sad.
I know.
I was working in the early 1970s as an astrophysicist, but it had very little direct connection with what was going on Earth, and ultimately, that's where I wanted to focus. How could the science that I knew be applied to solving problems that are really important to humanity as a whole? How warm the planet will get, and whether the conditions under which human beings and other species thrive will remain close to what they are today, or are things just going to spin out of control? Okay, so we start with driving forces. Those are what are the emissions going to be? And it's not that easy. If you think about it, what are we going to be doing 30, 50, 100 years from now that's going to cause human-made emissions? How's the political system going to respond? How's the human psyche going to respond? There you get in an area which is really impossible to predict. And the question then becomes, how do you fix up between these events? How do you recover from a hurricane before you have time to really fix the damage? The question, I guess we might as well drink, that I'll pick up next time is, why do we do nothing? Thank you.
Louisiana is really one of the more climate-sensitive places really on the planet. We are very vulnerable to climate change because this is a low-lying area that is in the path of a lot of hurricanes. As the ocean gets warmer, we are seeing an increase in the intensity of hurricanes. 2 of the 3 largest hurricanes to hit Louisiana in the recorded histories and have hit this decade in 2020 and 2021.
Whenever a hurricane comes, you only got so much time till it comes in. During the hurricane, as it was hitting, I was watching people's houses breaking in half, the roofs getting torn off. The back fences came down, trees started falling, the house was shaking, and then I could look outside my window and I watched my neighbor's porch fall. I thought I was gonna die. The next day, everything looked destroyed. We had seen an RV flipped over, and after we went to go check see if anybody was inside, it was one of my neighbors. It was an old man. He had passed away. We didn't have no cell service, so we just had to wrap up the body and try to keep it as preserved as possible until then we could contact authorities and after they could contact the family. It makes me feel kind of sad, but it's kind of like lost history.
Everything was in balance, or relatively so, until we started burning so much fossil fuels.
When you burn fossil fuels, it releases carbon dioxide molecules which stay in the atmosphere for a very long time, and they reflect that outgoing radiation back down to Earth. There's more energy coming into the planet than is going out of the planet into space, and so the planet has no choice but to heat up. The more fossil fuels we burn, the hotter the planet will get. That's it.
Places that are now hot and dry are going to wind up being hotter and drier. Places that now occasionally get heavy rainstorms, those storms are likely to be even heavier. If we don't get a hold of it now, get the problem under control, we'll just have hell to pay later.
I began my work in the environmental community. And the first big issue I took on was air pollution. But while I was investigating it, I ran across the climate change problem in the literature, in an EPA report on the environmental impacts of coal. And I was so astonished that we as human beings would be warming up the planet. And it turned out nobody was working on it. Nobody's trying to make it a public issue.
This frame is really of some significance because this was given to me with a nice inscription by Senator Tim Wirth of Colorado from July 28, 1988. The purpose of this bill was to establish a national energy policy to reduce global warming. This was a leading edge, this bill, to begin to address climate change.
You ask people what climate change was all about, they wouldn't have a clue. We were starting from scratch, zero. I spent most of my time talking to scientists so that I could understand the problem on the one hand and ask them to come forward to be outspoken.
I got a call from someone named Rafe Pomerantz, who was a well-known environmental activist, who was looking for maybe companionship on the road to trying to solve a very difficult problem. He was very good at working behind the scenes and convincing senators to hold congressional hearings on climate change.
So Michael became one of the prominent scientists to be outspoken on the issue.
There are very few things in life that I ever get frightened about, and this was one of them. How is it that human beings actually could come eventually to control where Earth's climate is going?
The typical scientist was saying, I can just tell you information, but I'm not going to talk politics or talk about what should change. And people like Oppenheimer decided to speak out, which is really brave.
I think if you look at some of my congressional testimony, you'll notice that I got it just about right.
I would predict that we would see the effects of climate change relatively near in the future, perhaps in a couple of decades.
I was very clear when I spoke to senators, there's going to be big problems unless we start cutting emissions now.
But moving the politics of climate change is a huge task because you have an enormous portion of the economy that is dependent on the use of fossil fuels. So all those interests created a fictional story about the issue in order to diminish any political chance of action.
That didn't want the average person to know what the truth was about climate change.
Exxon is now, and was then, one of the largest oil-producing companies in the world.
We know that Exxon scientists in the 1980s were fully aware of the gravity of the problem. Their predictions were very good, very accurate.
It was very well understood that CO2 had a major role maintaining the atmospheric balance of temperature. We knew where the temperature was going to go. It was only a question of how fast it was going to get, not if.
But they mapped it all out. They knew how it would affect their company. If society wanted to do something about this, fossil fuels would have to go at some point.
They were not interested in the long-term concerns of the planet. They were really interested in the short-term profits. We never published anything about what we found.
So Mobil is going to have a two-sided attitude toward climate. If you feel uncomfortable about Mobil's position, let us know.
They were not only funding and saying it wasn't a problem, they were publishing reports saying this is not an urgent problem.
Don't drive a big car, they say, but big cars are safer.
Is there a global warming problem? Thousands of scientists say no.
To this day, we suffer from that propaganda. It's something that many people still believe in. The science is critical to understand it, but the politics of it are essential to solving the problem. But the politicians become dependent on all these interests and companies for money to run their elections.
They really stopped us from taking action.
Keeping America competitive requires affordable energy.
How do you get a country that's an oil country to negotiate not selling more oil?
America is addicted to oil.
The economy of the Louisiana oil industry is a very, very precious one. Almost everybody worked for the oil industry, and if anything would have happened to it, there would be so many people going without jobs. If you live in Louisiana, young people like me have opportunities to sign on early to go into the military, mostly oil. My plan for the future is to work for the oil industry I feel bad, but there's nothing really much that we could really do to stop it as a single person.
Everybody has other things to worry about. Do I have enough money to send my children to college? Can I afford the insurance on my house? Climate change can seem, well, yeah, it's important. Yeah, it's a big risk, but we don't have to deal with it right now. The day inevitably comes when you can't push climate change off because it's starting to be such a big factor that you can see it in your own life.
It's traumatic because the areas that I once knew and once called home are gone, and after all our family's docks and everything for our shrimp boats and all that are down there, and once the land starts to eat away, the roads are gonna eat away, and after we're gonna have to start moving further and further up. The person that makes me happy is my girlfriend, Carmen. She's one of a kind, she's special. She listens to me and she understands me. She knows what I've been through. I got diagnosed with chronic anxiety earlier this year and post-traumatic stress disorder. Sometimes I could just start to stare off. It's something called like a 1,000-yard stare, and then I'll start to have flashbacks.
Oh my God!
I've seen a lot and I've been through a lot. I kind of always get worried whenever something bad happens. Good morning, Mr. Russell. How you doing today?
All right.
You ready to go catch some crabs?
Oh, yeah. I already got the boat fueled up.
Oh, one less thing we need to worry about. My grandfather used to go and catch crabs and shrimps. But because of all the hurricanes, nobody wants to live there because it's outside the levee system, it's not protected. So they get flooded off.
The rest too small. Okay, that one's too small.
All the elders that live down the bayous, they live there their whole life, but they're just not gonna be around to fully see it take effect. It's the youth that's gonna be around whenever it happens.
We just had an IPCC report come out, so we're really lucky to have a scientist here to talk to us and talk about some of the impacts. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Rose Abramoff.
So I'm an activist, but I'm also a scientist. I was fired earlier this year for holding up a banner at an earth science conference. The banner said, "Out of the lab and into the streets." And we held that banner for about 30 seconds, and for that I was fired. Thank you. I'm telling you this story, though, to explain why more of us scientists aren't out here in the streets with you. It's because we are, by and large, compelled by our institutions to remain neutral, even in the face of environmental devastation. And for over 40 years, most of us have complied. So on behalf of the scientific community, I apologize for our cowardice.
On the ground and hold on.
Somebody, sometime, is going to have to grapple with big problems like climate change. And if we don't, we just push off the responsibility into the future on other generations, including our own children. And that isn't just a matter of science. That's a matter of what are your morals? What are your ethical standards? What do you think about your fellow human beings?
Equality on the back shoulders.
And so, two options await us in the immediate future: climate crisis or climate revolution. Let's choose revolution.
We need the earth. Floods, fires, droughts. No surprise.
I have 7 grandchildren, and they will all be living on a much warmer planet, and with all the consequences.
So that they can have the livelihood and health that they deserve.
So each generation is going to continue to experience more intense impacts and have to live with them.
Northern India and Pakistan were afflicted with a severe heat wave, unlivable temperatures.
And that makes me very sad and upset. We pushed about as hard as we could.
We have 100-year floods now occurring every 5 years. Our air is polluted. Our skies are red from fires.
We are being burned out. Shut up! We will not be silent.
You know what I think I want to do whenever I get older? I think I might become a shrimp boat captain. See the water pump into the front of the boat? Look, you see the mud he's pumping up? That's all mud. You see the back end of the boat's coming up too. In the future, I imagine a pretty good future with a stable house, living with Corman, but I most probably won't be living in southern Louisiana. I might move up to like middle to northern Louisiana. My home will be underwater, at least to its roof, if not a little bit more. Yeah, would you like to maybe come? I know how to run a boat, and I feel like I'd be good at it.
It's the human habit to create a mess and then move on to somewhere else. But humanity's going to make it stand here. It's not going to have an escape route to some other place in the universe.
These changes will be rapid, costly, and largely undesirable. The viability of many ecosystems is at stake, as is perhaps the viability of civilization as we know it. Since the consequences of ignoring climate change will be severe, it's time to act now.
Mostly I feel sad that people didn't listen. If I knew this, others knew it also, and they chose to ignore it. I feel a strong sense of disappointment. We tried our best to get people's attention on it, so I overestimated the potential for change. It's a lot harder than I expected it would be.
In the early days, when I became aware of the climate issue, my wife, Lenore, gave birth to our son, Ethan. And I just thought quite a bit about the world that he was going to be living in. And I remember walking on a bridge near our house back in those days, you know, sort of wondering, well, what's it going to be like for him?
By 50 more years from now, like in 2080, water's gonna be almost up to New Orleans. And all these coastal areas are gonna be flooded over. It's gonna be abandoned, left underwater. Yep, something sad to think about.
Yeah, it's a big difference.
So what do you think we're gonna do?
We're gonna have to move.